Hello, and welcome back to Fiore Fight Breakdowns. Today we're going to be breaking down some Fiore-style fighting, specifically because the Fiorists really need a win after my last video where I made fun of them for standing in silly guards, which they do. Specifically, we're going to be watching some fight footage from my friend Connor Campbell, who recently moved to Scotland, and I now miss him very much. I used to fight him all the time, and he was always a really great fight, but what makes Connor really exemplematic of Fiore, and specifically Vadi style fighting, is one, he's left-handed, and two, he is what I would consider an expert at grappling at the sword, which, if anyone has bothered to read Fiore in the last 10 years, would probably realize very quickly that Fiore has an absolute laser focus on grappling at the sword. You could say it's his favorite thing to do. You could also say that pretty much every single thing in his book is either a setup to a grapple at the sword, a grapple at the sword, or a pontification about how cool he is because he's really good at grappling at the sword. So, we're going to watch this fight, we're going to break down some exchanges, and we're going to take a look at what high-level Fiore, in my mind, really looks like. And yes, I know it's Vadi, shut up. So for our first exchange, we have a really exciting flurry of exchanges and blows. One of the real key aspects that you first notice when you're watching Connor fence is that every single one of his actions is quick, crisp, precise, and most importantly, followed up by a defensive action. This leads to some very, very stylistically entertaining fencing because every single time Connor moves his sword, he's either very lightly and very expertly parrying something that's coming in at him, and then throwing a follow-up attack that either hits a very precise target, or if it gets parried, is immediately getting followed up by more strikes, more parries, more ripostes. And this is what I consider to be very emblematic of Fiore-style fencing, because in my mind, one of the key aspects of Fiore, and again, Vadi-style fencing, is that he breaks down his distance and his fencing treatise into two sections, at least in the longsword in two hands. And that is the wide plays and the close plays. And while there's a lot of grappling in both and there's a lot of fencing in both, in my mind, what this really tells you is that Fiore considers there to be two distances of fencing. One, the distance where you're fencing with your sword, and the close, where you're fencing with your arms. And the important aspect here is that when you watch Connor fence, he is very, very aware of when he's at that long distance, he is going to be throwing every single thing he can to try to land strikes either to your hands or occasionally to your head, and to try to make sure that he can maintain that distance for as long as he is advantageous in that position. If you are showing yourself to be the kind of person who can beat Connor in that long play distance, well, he's going to close it to close. But if he's winning in the wide distance, well, that's where he's going to stay the whole time. So after a while, you're starting to exchange blows with Connor over and over again, and eventually he either gets that tagging little hit on your hands or on your head, and then he tries to cover that after blow, perfectly demonstrating that he has control over that distance of the fencing. So next up, we have another classic Fiore/Vadi maneuver, which is the big attack that turns into a grapple at the sword. Now, one really important thing you probably noticed when you were reading Fiore is that he loves to grapple. I can't say it enough times. And Connor, similarly, as a very avid practitioner of Vadi, also loves to grapple. He's also left-handed, which means that his grapples turn out very, very differently than most right-handed versus right-handed grapples happen. On top of that, he understands that he's left-handed, and a lot of right-handed people, even when they know grappling, aren't going to know exactly what's going on. So he closes in and goes into these grapples probably even more than most Fiore practitioners, because he knows he has that little moment of hesitation in you, because the second you realize, oh my God, the sword's on the wrong side of the body, I have no idea what to do, that moment of hesitation is very easy to capitalize on. So Connor goes in with his big strike to the head. It gets parried off to the side. He closes the distance into that close play, tempo range, and then he swipes his opponent's sword off to the side with his right hand, presenting his blade with his left hand, gets the play. Very nice. But there's another important aspect here that I need to point out, and it's one that people, again, are going to get mad at me for, but too bad. Connor does not do this play starting off in Posta di whatever, Legend of Zelda. There is absolutely nothing added to this sequence by putting your sword on your spine. It makes you look dumb. It makes your sword out of measure. It makes your body out of measure. And the thing about being out of measure is that in order to then attack someone, you have to re-enter measure, which means that if at best you started in Posta di Stupid and then you ended up here right when you entered the normal range at which you would normally be fencing, you didn't really start your guard here. You started your guard here. All this did was give you something very fancy looking to do in the time it took for you to be completely outside range to entering the very, very longest point of range. And the reason this is important to understand is that there is no right way to do something from here. The only right thing to do from here is to go somewhere that makes sense. And if the only thing that this contributes is to make you look cool in a book, then it's worthless. The only thing that you need to be doing is starting your plays from here, because this is the point where you're actually executing the technique. As you see from this demonstration, there was no lack of power in Connor's initial attack. There was no lack of telegraph. The opponent knew exactly what was happening. They had to parry it. They had to parry it too hard, and they had to go offline, and they had to get grappled. Posta D, my sword is touching my butt crack for some reason, wasn't going to add anything here. So in this next little exchange, we have a pretty great demonstration of what I would consider the pros and cons of standing in a posed guard just overall. Now, what happens in this exchange is Connor walks into measure holding an ox-style guard. I forget what it's called in Fiore. And the basic idea here is that immediately upon entering the range, he immediately throws out a little bit of a stab there. And that makes sense. When you are standing in an ox-style guard, your point is pointed directly at your opponent's face. So all you have to do is extend your hands and voila, you are thrusting. So he throws his little thrust out there. But if you watch this very carefully, especially in the slow-mo, what you notice is that he immediately deviates his point off to the side and goes into a kind of hanging guard. Why? Well, because he didn't want to land that thrust at all. Not really. At a certain point, he recognized what his opponent was doing as they were entering into measure, and what they were doing was nothing. They were not attacking. If Connor had noticed that his opponent was attacking, he might have actually gone for a thrust that was actually intended to land, but in this particular case, he deviates it off to the side and goes into that hanging guard because what he wants his opponent to do is touch his sword and go into a bind. By throwing his sword off to the side a little bit, what he's essentially doing is it's almost like a bolo punch. You're waving your arms around over here to get your opponent to look over there and to do something about what's happening over there, even though it doesn't actually make any sense and it's not actually threatening. This is theoretically the idea that people have when they pose in these weird, silly guards. They think, oh, this person doesn't know what they're looking at. As a result, I'm going to confuse them with my weird action and they're going to do something inappropriate. But there's a problem with that theory. And the problem with that theory is that, A, where you start your little bolo punch provocational guard style, I'm not actually trying to hit you, probing maneuver, matters a lot. Now, when you go back and you rewatch this, you notice that Connor, again, starting in that ox-style guard, has a lot of options here in terms of both threat and defense. If you threw a cut straight towards the side of Connor's right side of his head, there would be a sword there. There would be no reason to do that. They would be passively blocked by just the existence of the blade. At the exact same time, the threat of that stab is very, very real. It's a very simple, very direct action to just extend your hands, and theoretically, if you do something silly, like just walk forward with your sword off at your side, you're going to get stabbed in the face. Understanding that every single guard needs to have these two aspects is part of what I'm talking about when I talk about the difference between standing in a pose guard like Ox and standing in a pose guard like, I don't know, left side tail guard, where your sword's all the way off into space, touching the floor behind you. The reason that that tail guard is basically useless is because it offers no real inherent threat. The threat is that you're going to move that to a more relevant guard that makes sense, like a plow or maybe some kind of like a spreck fencer or something on the side. The idea is that if your guard, the one you're currently holding, poses no threat and offers no defensive options, then the only thing your opponent is going to know when they look at you is that you're going to move out of that pretty damn soon when my attack starts coming at your head. And if your plan, when standing in a posed guard, doesn't account for the idea that your opponent might just decide to attack you, well then, you got a really bad option on your hand. Connor's guard has an option both for offense and defense, and was still in a position where when he executed his fake attack, it put him into the position that he wanted to be in to throw that follow-up cut to the head that got him some clean 3 points. This is how you do posed guards. This is how you do like telegraphs, intentional telegraphs. This is how you read your opponent. So on our next exchange, we have another aspect of Fiore, or again, Italian style fencing, that I think is very important to consider when you're looking at the differences between the two, and more importantly, when you're trying to exemplify really, really good high level Fiore, or again, Vadi fencing. And that is that pretty much all of the parry riposte that you see from Connor are going to be done from a position in which the sword is above the hands. And that might not seem very important until you really think about it, but that is actually one of the things that makes Italian fencing Italian fencing. It also is one of the things that makes German fencing so different, because German fencing treatises and fencers love their inverted positions, situations in which their hands are above their sword. Why? Because binding and winding always ends up putting you in positions where you're basically using the strong of your blade to bend and weave around in order to force your opponent's blade into different kinds of positions. Inevitably, that involves both pushing up and pushing down. And if you ever want to push down with your sword on another person's sword, you have to invert your blade. But there's none of that here. Now, what does that really mean? Well, it means is that every time Connor goes to parry, he's doing what most people would consider just traditional wall-style parries. Ones in which they put the guard of their blade up here, it sits basically above your elbow up to about the roof of your head, and it's really good at blocking everything that comes above it. Great, grand. German fencers do this too. But what's really key also is that every time he lands a parry, he then immediately throws a descending cut to one of two targets, either deep to the head or the chest, or shallow to the shoulder, arm, maybe even to the leg if he's feeling fancy. And the reason for this is that this is the shortest distance and the shortest and most economical way that you can do parry riposte style fencing. Whereas in a German system, if you land that good strong parry, the next thing you might want to do is to start winding, to start binding, and to start getting your point online. These things require you to change your position out of this traditional sword above your hand stance, and Fiore style fencing does not require that, because it pretty much exclusively says that if you're going to throw a cut, you're going to parry, throw a cut, disconnect from the bind. If you're going to parry, throw a thrust, do it, but disconnect from the bind. And that might seem a little counterintuitive for someone who loves to grapple, but actually it makes a lot of sense. If you look at the overall kind of flow chart of Fiore style fencing, in my mind, what it really is here is that you're sitting here at a distance, the wide play distance, and you're throwing parry riposte, parry riposte, parry riposte over and over and over again until something changes. And something is either going to change because you make it, because you close that distance, either off of a parry or off of a thing that you threw that got parried, or your opponent decides when. And this is really when it comes down to the art of doing any kind of fencing style. To have all these tools in your toolbox that involve what to do at this distance, what to do at this distance, and what to do at this distance, and then making the conscious decision to come up with a flow of events, a flow of sequence of techniques that takes you from one to the other, maybe back out again, maybe further, even in deeper. And the idea is that if you're the one in control of where these things are ending up, then you're in control of the fight, and you have a mastery of your fencing system. So when Connor, who is doing very, very well on the wide play distance with his parry riposte style game, he has every reason to stay there. He might never go into a close range play, though obviously we know he did. And the simple reality here is that sitting on the outside and playing parry riposte style fencing might not seem very Fiore. It might, because there's no grappling in it, but at the end of the day, in my mind, it's actually significantly more Fiore than it is anything else. Because at the end of the day, if you want to be a great Fiore fencer, you have to be great at the wide just as much as you are great at the close. Because if you're not good at the wide, you'll never make it to the close. So, again, a great example of how you can be a good fencer of a very particular type and not necessarily always be trying to copy exactly what it is that is in the book. You are taking the strategy, you are taking the tactics, you are taking the methodology of an ancient historical text, not trying to make picture-for-picture representations. So we come now to our final exchange. It's another very exciting parry riposte fest with another headshot as the final little bit. But what I really want to talk about here is what happens right at the very, very end of the exchange. Right after Connor lands his hit, he pulls up into a defensive posture, recognizes that opponent's not really doing anything, and shoves his hands forward. Why is this important? It's important to me and to anyone who wants to do Fiore and or Vadi because this is a very, very intentional transition point. This is the moment where Connor made the decision that he was no longer going to be in the wide plays. He's going to be in the close plays. He's going to go for a grapple. And it didn't end up happening because the judge said halt and they countered his point that happened right before it. But there's two important things to consider here. One, Connor landed a hit and he probably knew he landed a hit and he kept going anyway. But more importantly, too, he intentionally tried to transition from one style of Fiore, again, Vadi system, to another, and he did so on his own accord, and he didn't wait for it to happen through his opponent. Now, I've been talking a little bit about this, but I really want to outline a kind of like three-step process in interpreting a source. Step one in interpreting a source is trying to get the things that happen in the book to work. You see a play that says parry here, cut here, and you just drill it. You do it over and over and over again. And the reason you're doing that is because you want to get it into your mind that this situation, this thing is going to happen, and this is what you do when you recognize that it's happening. You are standing in a guard, the guard that it tells you to be in, and then someone comes in and they start doing the exact thing that the play said they were going to do. And now you say, okay, here I go. I'm doing exactly what the book says to do. And you try to do it over and over again so that you can recognize it and make it work. Step two of an interpretation is to recognize the tactics and strategy of that play and of all the other plays, how they fit together into a cohesive whole so that you can make a very nice flow chart into what you're going to do and what you're going to try to make happen. This is the point in which you're trying to add a little bit of spice and trying to look at the overall fencing style as a whole so that you can make things work in sequential order and so that some things can set up other things and other things can just kind of sit off to the side as kind of just basic reactions. This is where you really refine the style down to a set of techniques and tools that you like to use and you find to be very effective, and that you then start to generate into a style of your own, even though it is derivative of the style of the master that you're studying. But then we come to step three. And step three is, in my mind, where you start to add. This is where the HEMA people of the world start saying things like frog DNA. This is where you start to add techniques that are not in the book, that in your mind fit the techniques, not the techniques, but the tactics and strategy of step two that can add and make more effective the strategy that you have more or less developed for yourself. And this is where we come back to that hand push. That little hand push is not in the book. It's not in Fiore. It's not in Vadi. It's not in any book. And yet people do it a lot. Why? It's not just because it fits the mold of this manuscript. It's not just because it fits very well into step two. It's because it is an additional item. It's an additional thing that makes the tactics and strategy of your book work better. And you want to do things that work better because you're in a tournament. You're trying to win. You need more than just the tactics and strategy of someone who has been dead for 600 years. You need something a little bit more. And in my mind, it is not, well, it is ahistorical in the sense that this might be something that the historical person never did, but it's not ahistorical in the sense that you're just making shit up. You are doing something that accentuates a style that you are trying to exemplify. And so if you see people doing things that you don't recognize from the books in tournaments, please try to resist the urge to sound off in my comments, trying to tell me, fucking tournament-splain me about how it is that these things are supposed to work based on the tactics and strategy of the master. You clearly haven't thought about it very long if you think that these things work just plate by plate, play by play. You walk into a tournament and suddenly you're executing like plate number 67 in its exact order. You're full of shit. It doesn't work that way. You go into a tournament, you go all the way to step three, and you start doing things that are different that in your mind you think fit the style that you made up in step two, that you got from doing drills in step one. You're all doing it, whether you like it or not. So really, at the end of the day, if you want to be a good practitioner of Fiore or Vadi or Lichtenauer or RDL, you're going to have to do a little bit of frog DNA of your own. You're going to have to take a real hard, conscious look at the kinds of things that you like to do and how they may or may not differ from the thing the historical person like to do. You're going to have to think about the tactics and strategy of the things that meet in the middle, and then you're going to have to start adding things. you're going to have to start adding a little few tiny things at first, maybe even bigger things. Maybe it's the flat shield hill that you're adding. Maybe it's the two-handed Geistling because it's banned by the rules. Maybe at the end of the day, it's nothing more than a simple hand push. But you're going to add, and you're going to add, and you're going to get better, and you're going to start doing better, and you're going to thank me for it. Maybe not now, maybe not ever, but eventually, if you ever bother to, you'll thank me for it. So that's going to be it for today. No video on Thursday. I'm on vacation, and hopefully you like this little demonstration of good Fiore stuff. And of course, again, if you're an angry Fiorist, feel free to write me no less than 1,000 words in the comments about how, no. Fiore was an expert level artist. He totally drew this shit himself. That's why anatomically all the people look perfect, except for the faces, the number of fingers, the length of their toes, all kinds of garbage. They're great. Perfect. No notes.